Principles of Microeconomics. We're here. So there are going to be sort of two kinds of things in this class that you're going to be learning. And so there's two sides of the same coin, and you're going to want to be good at both of them to do well in this class. One side of it is the economic models, and the other side is the economic concepts. So I briefly hinted at this before, but the economic concepts that we're going to be going at are things like incentives. How can you reason through a question and of what people are going to do by thinking about what are they incentivized to do, right? And that manifests itself in all sorts of different ways. And thinking about those sort of concepts is going to be important, as you would expect in any class. Learn the material and the concepts. The other half of that is the economic models. So what economists like to do is we like to take those economic concepts that we have and formalize them, by which I mean we put them into a set of equations that sort of describes our thinking, and then we solve those equations out. So there will be a little bit of, it's not too bad, but there will be a little bit of math in this course. And it's not even so much math. Usually it's just graphics. It's graphs. It's moving graphs around and understanding what it is that's going on in those graphs such that you know what it means to move them around. So the math itself is not going to go anywhere beyond, algebra. What I want you to do is when we're talking about a model, when we have a graph up on the board or some equations, to not just think about how to solve through the equations, which, that will be good to do, but also think about what it means, because you're not going to be able to solve a lot of the questions if you're just thinking about it as a math problem. But you want to be thinking about it as a representation of our economic thinking, which is what it actually is. So you're going to want to be, these are the two things that we're going to be learning in this class, these sort of two halves. And all that these models are doing is helping us formalize our thinking, right? All right, some tips for doing well in this class. Read the whole question. If there's a homework or an exam, something, make sure that you have read the entire question. I give this tip in all my classes, and in other people's classes as well. It's always heartbreaking to me when I'm grading something and I can see that somebody got the wrong answer simply because they didn't read all the way to the end of the question. Makes me feel bad. So please don't do it. Please actually read through all the question. As a writer of questions, I can tell you that it's often very difficult to specify a question enough so that there's only one answer to it. And usually those details will come at some point in the question. So you got to read all the details to, because otherwise the question probably isn't well defined. Do read the textbook, specifically the step-by-step guide. There is a lot of helpful information in there, especially about working through those economic models and what they mean. You will have some difficulty if you try to skip the readings. You'll definitely have some difficulty if you try to skip all the lectures. A lot of the materials in there. Do read the answers also. I will be making the answers available for the homeworks basically after the late work assignment date has passed. So you can check back in on what you got right, what you got wrong. Sometimes there'll be explanations of why you got those things right or wrong and what the actual answers are. I find that is often very helpful in getting you on the right track. Another place to put your head in is that this is not really a business class. We're in the business school. I assume most of you are business students, but this is information and concepts that are helpful for business, but it itself is not a business class. That's why it's the School of Business and Economics, not the School of Business. And so, I'm not teaching you how to manage. I'm not teaching you how to run a business. I'm teaching you how to explain how the world works and how to anticipate how people work with incentives, right? How do people make choices? And clearly those are things that will be helpful if you are running a business or working in a business. But that's not the first order goal. Teaching how to explain the world, which will be a generally useful skill that business people tend to like to know. But if you're worried about hey, I'm not doing a lot of case studies or whatever, it's because it's not a business class, right? So what I want you to try to think about is to try to explain the world as you go about. I think it will, it's a muscle that you need to work, and that we will be trying to hone as we do that. Right? That's really the point of this class. If you can get good at that, you'll be really good at the end. It's not that uncommon, for example, that I'll have like an exam question and I have an answer in mind for it. With an open-ended response, and then someone will give a better answer than I had in mind because they've gotten that good at explaining the world, and I'll give them points for it, right? That's what you're really trying to do. So I want you to be an economic naturalist. As you go through the world and you see what people are doing, I want you to think to yourself, why are they doing that? What are the incentives that drive them to make the decisions that they're making? Right. And this is not something that you really even need to take an economics class to start thinking about on your own. You can do it anywhere. So for example, when I wrote this slide, I was sitting in Kaladi Brothers Coffee many, many years ago. And I was looking around. I thought, okay, well, The Stranger. Why is The Stranger free, but the New York Times costs money, right? Who's making that decision? The Stranger decided to make itself a free paper. The New York Times decided to make itself a paid paper. They made those decisions. Those are decisions that they made. That was not handed down from on high. Somebody had to make that choice. Why did they make that choice? What were the incentives that were in front of them when they made it? What were they thinking about? What would have made them make the choice differently, right? They had day-old bagels on a plate in this cafe that were cheaper than the regular bagels. Why did they do that? Why have they chosen to offer day-old bagels? Why have they chosen to offer those day-old bagels at a lower price? Why not get rid of them so people have to buy the regular price bagels, right? They clearly had some reason for offering those bagels. They had happy hour pricing at this cafe. Why do they have happy hour pricing? Why not keep it the same non-happy hour price all the time? Or if happy hour is so profitable, why not make it the low happy hour price all the time, right? Well, a lot of alternatives they could have chosen that they didn't. They bought in pastries at this cafe, right? Why do they do that? Why not make their own pastries, right? Anytime there's a decision being made, there's some sort of economist lurking around in the corner asking why it was made. And if you can get in the habit of always asking that question of why are things the way that they are, why have people made the choices that they've made, you'll be in good shape for this class and for understanding the world a little more broadly anyway, right? Don't take things as given. Most of the things that we see in the world are the result of a decision that somebody made, and that is then a decision that we want to understand a little bit better. To reiterate, by the way, for anybody coming in late, feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have questions or whatever. In this course, we will learn. So we're going to talk about trade-offs and making choices. I've talked about this a bunch already. I kept interrupting the housekeeping to talk about it. Clearly, I'm excited about it. But how we make trade-offs, how we make choices. We want to understand why people do what they do. Isn't that an interesting question? I think so. That's why I'm an economist. And so we're going to think about it. Why do people do what they do? And then once we get past the individual people, how do those people all come together? Because the world that we live in is not the result of individual people making choices and then stops there. They make choices in an environment where everybody else is making choices too. You put a bunch of people together who are making decisions about what to buy, and suddenly you got a market. You put a bunch of people together making decisions about whatever, and you have a society, right? That's how it all comes together. Individual people making choices, and then you can look at broader structures as being just agglomerations of all that stuff. So if you can understand the individual choices being made, you can understand, at least at some level, how those choices come together to shape broader things like markets. We're also going to think about how these sorts of decisions that people make inform how government and company policies are or could be designed. If you think about a government policy, there's always thinking about how people are going to respond to it, right? How do you decide what the tax level should be, right? Well, you got to think, well, how are people going to respond to this? If we tax something, if we tax income, are people going to stop working? Well, clearly not. We have taxed income and people still work plenty, but maybe they're working less than they would have. I don't know, but that's the kind of thing that you'd want to think about when you're deciding what the income tax level would be. Or if you're a company, how do you decide what price to sell your good at? Right? Let's say you're a video game company coming out with a new game. What are you going to charge for it? Right? You have a choice, and you need to think about when you're making that choice, how are people going to respond to the incentives that you've put in front of them? The higher you price your game, that raises the cost to your customers of buying your thing. They might choose not to do it, which is not what you want them to do, right? In an ideal world, from your perspective as a video game maker, you'd charge $1 million and everyone would buy a copy anyway, and you'd be super, super rich, right? But why don't you do that? Why don't you charge $1 million and have everybody buy it? Well, because you know that they won't buy it. It's their choice not to buy it. So you have to anticipate how they're going to make decisions in order to figure out what it is that you're going to do. And so we're going to be just generally thinking about how to reason about people's behavior. What do people do? And we're going to be doing that by using incentives as a starting point.